Thanks so much, especially to Olivia and Nick for inviting me to present here today. 70 years of this conference is almost as old as the state of Arizona. It's really impressive. So this paper is really, it's a little bit of an overview with a focus on some of my own previous research on how people form beliefs with regards to factors that determine how they should save and spend for retirement. So when you're thinking about the decisions that people make and the guidance that people get for what they should do with regards to their savings pre-retirement and their, I guess this is a bad word, deaccumulation after retirement?
Spending.
Spending after retirement. Okay, they're spending after retirement. You have to make all these forecasts of things, right? You have to think about what are asset returns going to look like, what date am I going to retire, what's my house going to be worth going forward? So all of these little ingredients are really important, and there are all these really big forecasts of things that are going forward. And the way that economists have traditionally treated these forecasts is by saying that people look at all the available information that's out there. For example, they'll look at historical asset returns and they'll say, okay, that's probably a good prediction of what's going to happen in the future. Okay, so that's what sort of like classical economics sort of teaches us and uses as a tool. But the reality is that many people have different ways of forming their beliefs about these key inputs. Okay, and so I'm going to highlight first one of the key inputs into these sort of decisions that you make, and that is the role of mortality beliefs. So let's start out with this idea here. So how many people do you think die each year because of killer sharks? Is this a big risk factor?
Probably 10,000.
10,000 people per year? 5 per year? Okay, 5. And so how many by cows?
400.
100. Oh, you're sort of right in the factor relative to killer sharks. So here's the real data.
Sharks.
Sharks. This is in the U.S. Sorry, I should have clarified that. So that was that's like funny. Okay, so one person per year dies because of a shark attack in the U.S. But you'll look down here and you will see cows kill 20 people per year. So cows are 20 times more likely to kill you. But which of these two gets a lot of attention from us? So you're probably familiar with Jaws, the movie, with Shark Week, the television program. And cows do not get comparable attention, though they probably should, right? And so you can see how this completely distorts our mortality beliefs to thinking about these kind of really, really idiosyncratic, rare things. What if you think about sort of long-run planning with regards to this? So here's a survey taken by Prudential Financial, and they asked people to put down a blue dot on this graph for the age of the oldest person that they've known. And you'll notice that there's a lot of people who they know who lived up until 100 years old, and a lot of people even beyond that. But if you think about what is the actual distribution of the ages at which people die, it looks nothing like this at all, right? And so if people are forming their beliefs about mortality based on other sort of available at hand sort of ideas, whether it's I could die because of a shark attack tomorrow, or I'm thinking about these like really rare instances of people living until very, very far in the future, then you're going to have these miscalibrated beliefs about what happens to you in the future. And so, in any of the sort of models that economists write down to think about how much people should spend both before and after retirement, it's all about the types of trade-offs that you make between things that happen today versus the expected future benefits. And in this, again, you have these ingredients of expectations regarding things like asset returns, future tax rates, and retirement ages. But one of the most important ingredients in this is people's perceptions of their own longevity. And the reason for this, obviously, is that if you think you're going to live until 100, then there's a lot of reason to save a lot today so that you have more to spend in the future. But if you think that you're going to basically die the day that you retire, as probably most of the economists in this room plan to do, then you don't really need to save that much beyond that. And so I'm going to highlight from a paper of mine that was published a few years ago some key findings on the role of mortality beliefs in people's spending and savings decisions. And so the key findings that we have in this paper are that mortality beliefs, they actually flip, surprisingly, from underestimation when people are young to overestimation as people age. So people go to focusing more on these rare events when they're younger to thinking more about these really long-term events when they're older. What explains this is, just as I pointed out, the salience of these different risk factors as people age. So people start to have what's on top of mind. That changes as people age. And this is going to affect people's life cycle financial decisions. It helps explain kind of parsimoniously in one sort of simple idea the undersaving that people have for retirement, as well as the slower drawdown of wealth post-retirement that we observe in the data. And it also affects portfolio allocation at all ages over the life cycle. So I'll show you these results. So the first result is that these mortality beliefs, they flip over the course of the life cycle. And what I have here is that the solid black line is the objective probabilities that you would take about surviving until the end of this period in this of life. And you can see that what happens if you compare this to the subjective probabilities, which is the blue line that has these standard error bars around it, is that people, when they're young, they underestimate the chances of living to very long ages. But this changes as people age. And so as people get older, they actually overestimate their chances of living very, very long. And this is a really robust finding. I don't want to take credit for being the first person to have shown this. This goes back to work even in the 1980s, and there's even people who have co-authored on papers in this room who have shown similar findings. So I don't want to take full credit for this. But what I do want to take credit for in my paper that was published a few years ago is sort of understanding and unpacking both what drives this as well as what consequences this might have. And so the first thing that we did in our novel survey for this is we asked people what they were thinking about when they formulated these beliefs. And what you'll notice is that there's this really distinct age pattern. Is that it goes from people spending more time thinking about these sort of rare events like traffic accidents, risky lifestyle, animal attacks when people are younger, to downweighting them as they get older and focusing more on the natural course of aging, medical conditions, and dietary habits as they get older. And you also notice that, that these rare events, they're actually kind of overweighted to begin with. They should be really, really, really small in this picture, right? You shouldn't think about them really that much at all. But then also, these also predict the mortality belief calibrations that people exhibit. And so on the y-axis is sort of our measure of how off you are in terms of your prediction of your longevity. And what we find is that people who focus more on the natural course of aging and dietary habits expect to overestimate their longevity by more than somebody who doesn't. And anyone who focuses on these rare events are people who underestimate their own longevity. They're the sort of people who think, I could die by a shark attack any single day. So then what we do is we take, it's not so far-fetched, So then what people do, then what we do in the paper is we look and we think about what does this imply for the sort of normative prescriptions that you would have, within the context of this economic life cycle model, with this life cycle model that we use as economists. And so what we end up finding, in this picture what I compare is the actuarial probabilities that you get from the CDC and the health statistics to the subjective beliefs that we collect in our survey. And what you'll find you can first look in the top left panel at consumption patterns, and what you'll see is that people with subjective beliefs, they consume a lot more when they're younger than people that use objective probabilities, and so they have less to consume at post-retirement as well as a result of this. In the bottom left, you can look at people's cash on hand. What this means is essentially their wealth accumulation over the life cycle, their wealth patterns. And you can see that somebody that uses subjective beliefs accumulates significantly less wealth at their peak of around retirement age. And in the bottom right corner, what you'll see is that this affects people's portfolio decisions at every point of the life cycle. So somebody with subjective beliefs should be having more of their asset allocation going towards risky assets. And this is mainly a result of them not having saved as much as they would have if they had used actuarial probabilities. And so also in the paper that I've helped draft for this, I talk about some other literature that has focused on subjective beliefs and sort of how you might think about them in the context of these decisions that people make over the life cycle. One of the really interesting findings is that people actually tend to underestimate their retirement age. So that whole idea about postponing retirement, right? So people systematically do that. They think that they're going to be able to retire much sooner than they can. People often have incorrect forecasts about various economic variables, such as housing prices, stock market returns, and their own employment. And one of the interesting findings in this literature is that different socioeconomic status helps give sort of different pessimism versus optimism about people's beliefs about stock market returns. And then lastly, I have some new work that is just sort of released into the working paper space about people's expected inheritance planning. And I'll show you one of the key figures from this, is that actually people tend to overestimate the value of the bequests that they expect to leave. And so this comes from long-standing household survey data where we can look at what people actually leave in terms of what their inheritance is to their heirs versus their expected probabilities that they have in the years leading up to their death. And you can see that at all of these different thresholds, people are overestimating their chances of leaving inheritances, even the small amounts of 10,000 or more, but even up to these large amounts of over 500,000. Okay, so just to conclude, this life cycle financial planning requires lots of forecasts of lots of little variables, right? So your mortality, your asset returns, your retirement dates, and these all kind of add up to a lot of individual errors that people can make. And so lastly, I'm going to leave right after this conference, but please, I feel really guilty about it, but Olivia and I talked about whether I should come or not. And she said, yeah, it's okay. So if you'd like to reach out to me and chat, I'm more than available to respond to you via email. So thank you so much for having me here today. Thanks.